A very good evening, everyone, and warm welcome to our thematic panel series Across the Table. As part of the public consultation for India's Science, Technology and Innovation Policy 2020, we are very glad to have our eminent panelists, interested viewers, and the spirited team behind this unique initiative. I am Radhika Trikha from Science, Technology, Innovation Policy 2020 Secretariat, and I will be the moderators for today's session, along with Dr. Sudhira from the Gubi Labs. Before starting the session, I will briefly introduce what is this STIP 2020 initiative. So this is a joint initiative of Office of Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India and Department of Science and Technology to bring out our new science policy, that is Science, Technology and Innovation Policy 2020. The science policy formulation process, it has started with 4 tracks. The track 1, where we are involving the huge public to come and give the consultation. Track 2, in which we have identified the experts, they will give the consultation to us. Then track 3, where ministries and states and union territories, they will correspond to their policy document. And finally, the track 4, where the apex level committee will finally take up the final science, technology, and innovation policy document further. So these thematic panel of which we are today part of, these are exclusive track 1 consultation process. And today we are having the 8th panel session of this series. The underlying idea is to link the track 1, that is the public consultation, with the track 2, that is experts drafting. In this panel series, we will be having experts drawn from our own thematic groups for the science, technology, innovation policy, and various other members from the industries, from the academia. The objective is to make more voices heard in this policy and make this truly a very participatory policy making process. I'll request our various audience to use hashtag AskSTIP2020 industry to post your questions, your comments, your queries, and to reach to us. Kindly mention your name and place. That will be easy for us to put across your question to our panelists. So today's panel session theme is Industrial R&D and Innovation, focusing on the role of industry in shaping the science, technology, and innovation ecosystem of our country. As we all know, industry is the major stakeholder of a national R&D ecosystem for any country. They are the major caterers to the commercialization of research, taking research from depths to the market and to the community. So with this, I welcome our elite panelists, and I'm happy to share that we have representation from industry, we have representation from academia and think tank. So I look forward to this deliberation. With this, I request my co-moderator, Dr. Sudhira, to introduce our panelists to the audience. Over to you, Sudhira.
Yeah, thank you, Radhika. Really delighted to introduce our esteemed panel we have with us today. I'm sure I will realize each of them bring in unique experiences and sort of outlook that we look forward today, and hopefully that will enrich our discussions today. So today, starting with, we have Dr. Rohini Srivathsa. She is the National Technology Officer at Microsoft India. She comes with over 25 years of experience in the industry and academia, so to say. She has been a member of the Wiley Innovation Advisory Council and is also on the Advisory Council of the EC Department at Carnegie Mellon University. And she's also serving as a Scientific Advisory Committee of the National Mission on Cyber-Physical Systems that is promoted by the Department of Science and Technology, Government of India. And she's also recognized as one of the top 10 most influential analytics leader in India in 2019. And she comes with a PhD in computer science from UT Austin, and I think we can see that she comes with enormous experience and background in the academia. Welcome, Dr. Rohini. We look forward to having your interaction views on this. Next, we have Mr. Janak Nabar. He is the CEO of a think tank based in Pune called Center for Technology Innovation and Economic Research. He has been leading the research efforts at CTIER. He's also a member of the CIA National Committee on Technology and has been part of the various working groups constituted by NITI Aayog and National R&D laboratories to develop the India Innovation Index. And he's previously worked as an economist and investment strategist in private sector in Singapore. So his experience also has been with, he's also worked with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees in Belgrade. And he's also interested in both research and technology he also regularly writes, as in he's got publications in EPW and things like that. We welcome you, Mr. Janak. Next, we have Mr. Shrijeet Mishra. He is the Chief Innovation Officer and the heads Aditya Birla Group. Besides that, he's heading the group on Aditya Birla Group Corporation Limited, and he joined Aditya Group, Birla Group in May 2018. But before that, he has prior experience with Times of India and also Hindustan Unilever there, and he was a management committee and executive director. I was just listening to him, and I gather he's got a lot of interest in starting universities, so to say. So I guess that's a nice mix to have somebody from somebody who's got a nice flavor between university and in the industry, and looking at how to get them translated. We welcome you, sir. And next, we have Dr. Rajamannar. He's the Executive Vice President and Advisor to MD, looking at the discovery and high impact innovations, along with sustainable health solutions at Sun Pharmaceutical Industries. He's also a non-executive director of Sun Pharma, advanced research company, and has been associated with Sun Pharma since 1993. He's now head of R&D at Sun Pharmaceutical Industries, prior to which he was also the executive VP and whole-time director of Sun Pharma Advanced Research Company. He comes with an extensive experience in the pharmaceutical industry, and I also learned he has more than 200 patents, 250 patents, and almost 30 publications there, and an alumnus of IIT Madras. Welcome you, sir. And then we have another person from the IIT Madras, Professor Mahesh Panchagnula. He's also the now current dean looking after alumni affairs and corporate relations. He's a professor of applied mechanics at the IIT Madras and an associate faculty in charge of the IIT Madras incubation cell. He's also been a faculty associate of the National Center for Combustion R&D. We welcome you, Professor Mahesh. So with this, I welcome you all once again to give a brief of what is happening today. The discussion is divided into two rounds. In the first 45 minutes or so, we will be hearing from our panelists on the relevance of the theme in context, in the context of science, technology, and innovation policy for 2020, followed by a round of question and answers from the general public watching this live streaming today. So we have a team in the background who's also gathering questions and any comments that may come by on various social media channels, including Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, and perhaps also on LinkedIn. And since this is live streamed on YouTube, please use the hashtag #AskSTIP2020 Industry so that our volunteers or other colleagues can actually gather them. Once again, I thank you all for joining this evening, besides amidst your busy schedule. I'll request my colleague Radhika to take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Sudhira, for presenting our panelists to the audience. We are really glad to have such eminent panelists with us. We will surely get the thoughtful industry inputs for our science, technology, and innovation policy today. With this, I'll request our panelists to give their introductory remarks in context of the STIP 2020. So I start with Dr. Rohini. Dr. Rohini, over to you.
Sorry, thank you very much and appreciate the opportunity. First of all, let me congratulate the Department of Science and Technology and the Principal Science Advisor for this policy that we are putting in front and the extensive engagement that is happening with the public and multiple stakeholders, because as we know, in the world of today, technology is becoming the mainstream for every aspect of business and society. And if you look at the current pandemic that we are dealing with, it is even more so that digitization and technology is going to become more and more mainstream for every aspect of our economy. So therefore, the formation of the policy and making sure that we are taking the inputs from different stakeholders is critical. Look, I represent a technology company, Microsoft, that is has been in business for quite some time. But I would say that as an organization, as a company that is in the technology industry, we have had our own journey of reinventing ourselves and transforming. So if many of folks in the business world or the student world have seen Microsoft from whether it is from our Office suite of products or Windows, etc., what the Microsoft today is a very different company, and that is a result of innovation. And the innovation has come not just from within the company, but as part of a broader ecosystem. Because at the end of the day, we think of our role as a platform provider, which means that we are there to bring our innovations to developers, to students, to businesses of all sizes, governments, education, because we believe that when we bring that innovation to others is when real impact happens. And if you think about, if I go back to our overall mission as such, which is about empowering every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more, I think that mission has been thought about by Satya Nadella and his overall team very thoughtfully, because we do believe very, very strongly every day that that is indeed our mission, that how do we empower? And empowering becomes is through innovation. So clearly Microsoft, we have a research center that is across the world that is doing cutting edge research and across all areas of technology frontiers, whether you call quantum computing or artificial intelligence or all forms of algorithms. But I think the idea becomes, how do we bring that innovation in the hands of developers, as I said. So I would break down my comments into, I would say, three broad areas of where we see innovation happening. I think the first is, if you look at the COVID world itself, and we know that we are entering a world which is about being remote everything. Whether it is remote education, whether it is remote selling or telemedicine, development events. We are having this event right now remotely. All of us are in different locations and we are using technology. So I think the element of remote everything is one big one. And in a way, we have been in that journey already. And I'll quote a recent remark from Satya Nadella where he said that it seems to us that in 2 months, we've had 2 years worth of digital transformation. And as a technology company, we are seeing that across the world, that people want to be able to work productively, want to collaborate, want to be efficient, want to connect at a human level, remotely and in the best way possible. And there are tools out there to help you do that. And so that one big theme I do see as something that as a country we will need to keep developing on, as we think about not just remote from collaboration perspective, but also how do we bring medicine and experts and in healthcare or expert educationists to the remote parts of our country by using technology and really bridge the gap between access and availability of skills of high-end skills, right? And in the process transform the country. The second theme I would put in is that of the citizen developer. What we are seeing is, as business processes are becoming digital, and whether you name it sales or service or customer service or finance, everything is becoming digital. But people are also learning that digitization and coding and development of applications is not just the job of a few people who have software skills. So we are seeing the emergence of this citizen developer, which is the area of what I would call low code, no code kind of programming. Because what people are seeing, the people, let's say somebody who's handling the customer service, really understands the process in depth. And can that person, using very simple tools, literally drag and drop with very basic kind of coding, can they develop applications? So it's not just the IT technology department but that this citizen developer who comes into play, that explodes the kind of innovation one can see out there when that boundary between between technology and users is changed. Finally, I would say that it's the world of the cloud. And people like, of course, I'm in the technology industry and I live and breathe the cloud, but no industry today is going to innovate unless they are on the cloud, because a lot of the innovation, data, technology, latest algorithms and frameworks, they are on the cloud. So if you want to be fast as a startup, you want to bring intelligence into your products, into your services, you have to be agile, and you cannot develop everything inside, which is where you need to be then leveraging what's available on platforms out there. You need to bring ecosystems of data together to be able to innovate. So I'll stop with that. I think for us, innovation is part of who we are, because without that, you cannot survive in the technology industry. And I'm very happy to contribute to not just this panel, but I'm also contributing to the task group 2 with the futuristic and disruptive technologies. So very happy to help the country in this next move. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rohini, for putting your thoughts on the subject in such an explanatory manner. We will definitely come to the aspects that you have touched in your introductory remark. We'll take up with this in our question. Moving ahead, I'll request Mr. Janak Nabar to present his views on the subject and its relevance in Science, Technology and Innovation Policy 2020. Over to you, Janak.
Thank you, Radhika. I'd like to talk a little bit about spending of innovation and R&D by industry and why that is important. In our thematic group on innovation, one of the key recommendations that we've made is that this should become the core of national R&D spending. Currently, we all know, I think it's seeped into national consciousness that India just does not spend enough R&D. It's 0.7% of GDP that it has been for almost 3 decades. Uh, of national R&D spending, 42% today is industry, 52% is government, and about 6-7% is in the higher education sector. That's what is the R&D that's performed. Now, why is industrial R&D important? Any country, you take Korea, people cite Korea's high spending on R&D as a share of GDP today. But if you look at the transformation that a country like Korea has seen, they have seen sustained period of high growth for almost 2 or 3 decades, where you had 8 to 10%. The spending on R&D was also sort of largely driven over time by industrial R&D. And as their GDP grew, their share of spending on R&D in GDP also increased. So if you take India and Korea in 1970, the share of spending on industrial R&D was 15% in both countries. Today, it's 85% in Korea. In India, it's only 42%. The concentration of R&D in industry, I'd like to highlight that we have maybe about 200 companies that account for almost 85 to 90% of industrial R&D in India today. You talked about, Rohini spoke about Microsoft and its initiatives. I remember writing some a couple of years ago where Microsoft, I think, according to the Euro scoreboard, spent $12 billion on their global R&D, which was at that time what the government of India was spending. Today, Microsoft, as per the latest figures that I have in, Dr. Rohini, please correct me, it's about $17 billion, which is almost all of what India spends. Top 20 companies globally spend more than all of Indian industry on R&D. You take Bosch, I think Bosch is the 20th spender, it spends 7 billion, and that's much more than all of Indian industry put together. Right? The structure of industrial R&D. If you look at where we're concentrated, we're largely, especially on the global stage, we do have a presence in the pharmaceutical and biotechnology sector, the IT service, so software and computer services. and also the automobile sector. But if you look at sectors like electronics, electrical engineering, technology and hardware, we have absolutely no presence on that stage, on the global stage in those sectors. Having said that, India also has a huge presence of multinational R&D centers, uh, almost 1,500 of them in India today. When you look at the patents that they have obtained from the US Patent Office, you see apart from computer and software services, many of them are in sectors like technology, hardware, electronics, and electrical engineering. So that research, part of it is happening on Indian soil today, right? So one of the recommendations is how do you engineer a better spillover of that research capability that's actually being done on Indian soil by these multinational R&D centers. Um, if you look at India's high technology exports as a share of exports, today it's only 9% of total manufactured exports. If you pick countries like whether it's China, it's US, UK, wherever, it's 20-25% of their manufacturing exports are high technology exports. So if we really need to be globally competitive, if we need to grow as a country for 8% for a long period of time, industry has to step up. I mean, there are challenges, no doubt. COVID has added to those challenges. We've had issues in the banking sector and credit availability has been an issue. But having said that, I think industry really would need to increase its spend on R&D and innovation and ensure that it becomes the core of our national innovation system. Yeah, I'm going to keep it at that for now and take questions later. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Janak, for giving us an holistic view on industry participation in national innovation ecosystem. We'll be definitely discussing this thing, that how we are going to increase the GRD and how this public and private participation in the whole national R&D has to be balanced. It should be 1:1. Like in US, in South Korea, as you mentioned, they are above the 70% level. So how India has to bring our industry so forward that government has to be in back front and industry has to be in forefront. Well, definitely this is one of the most discussed topic on all the science thematic groups as well. So we look forward for discussing on that. Now I request Sudhira to take a lead and invite our other panelists to give their introductory remarks. Over to you, Sudhira.
Yeah, thank you, Radhika. I guess Janak and Dr. Rohini brought up a very interesting thing. In fact, in the previous sessions on financing, same thing came in what Janak was mentioning on the role of industrial R&D there, and as in particularly on how much spending is happening and the need for enhancing it. Since we are looking into that perspectives and the need for also, he brought on the need of patenting and all of it. I think it's apt for us to reach out to Dr. Rajamannar to share his perspective on the role of private industries in the STI ecosystem. Especially, he comes from the pharma sector, and in the current sort of COVID crisis, I think it will be useful for us to gain from his views. Dr. Rajamannar.
Yeah, thank you, Sira.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Rajamannar from Sun Pharma. I'm happy to be participating in this meeting. You know that, I mean, any technology or innovation should lead to economic growth, and that innovation should be sustainable. In the pharma world, the standard of care today, I mean, it becomes outdated 5 years down the line because there are new innovations, new therapeutic targets, potential different mechanisms. And unless you have a abreast of what is happening and improve technology time to time, because there is a change of environmental laws, there is a change of regulatory requirements, there is change of some kind of genotoxic impurities. Probably you would have seen 6 months back, many of the important antihypertensive drugs got stopped because there was some NMDA impurity which is genotoxic. So what it used to be generating a kind of a revenue, it stops suddenly one day because there is something has been found and that you need to resolve on a war footing basis. There is nothing kind. In pharma is one thing that there is nothing kind. You can sell a product with a rebate, depending on the quality. It needs to meet the standard quality and not also a cost, which is very important.
Yeah.
So, I mean, unless you know, I mean, what we are doing, what is the requirement, what is going to be the future, it's very difficult to maintain the growth in the pharma sector because there is a changing scenario in every aspect, whether it is a new product, whether it's a new technology, whether it is a new environmental laws, or it is a new regulatory requirement. That's very important. And if you see today the COVID situation, I mean, we were not having drugs like remdesivir, favipiravir, and things like that, though we were manufacturing hydroxychloroquine. But in last 3 months' time, we were able to develop technologies for favipiravir and remdesivir and do the clinical trials, and now it is there in the market, as a repurposed drugs for treating the COVID patients. That's the kind of a speed, a pharma company need to work, I mean, in terms of giving the health solutions. And another aspect is that are we there in terms of anticipating the future problems in health? Are we there in terms of identifying what is the national health status in different therapy areas? It could be, today the vulnerable patients, they are the hypertensive or the diabetic comorbidities or people who underwent any kind of a transplantations. So they are the more vulnerable people who can get into this COVID problem and they can lose their lives. And the lockdown also resulted a great economic loss because we have lost the health and the workforce is not sitting at home. So if we are not able to anticipate what is going to be there, if Gilead could develop a product for Ebola virus, which was not the disease in America, and now it has been repurposed for this COVID, then we are not looking into what we need to do. If there is something in the future, what we need to do that. So the innovation should be in terms of if you lose the health of the nation, then everything boils down to that we lose the economy going down. And probably last 2 months or 3 months, the GDP loss would be more than 200 billions. So we need to anticipate in terms of what is the need of the situation and what is the need of the hour and how do we address it. And kind of technologies is required and what kind of future products we need to focus. As a company, we know that we are the world pharmacy and we export more than 25% of the world pharmaceuticals. But in terms of whether we are there in terms of developing a new drug, which is we are not into that arena. So it's a time that we need to venture into a private public partnership drug discovery process. If you don't do that, probably there would be COVID-3, there would be COVID-4, there could be another Ebola, or it could be another MERS or something like that. We'll be encountering these problems year after year, or one after another. But if this kind of lockdowns continue, then we would be losing the economic growth. So the important thing is that we know that we are that in terms of manufacturing drugs which are available, which has been proven in terms of efficacy or standard of care, and we are the best in the world. But are we there in terms of finding a new drug? How do we do that? But if you ask me whether we don't have the lack of knowledge, it's not the lack of knowledge, it's the coordinated efforts. We have best of the chemists, best of the biologists, best of the pharmacologists, best of the molecular biologists, best of the toxicology. We have everything, but in a pockets. But we need to identify and bring them together and say that our objective next 5 years is to find the best of the standard of care in hypertensive or diabetes or immunology or antibacterials or vaccines and kind of things.
Yeah.
So I think if the STIP 2020 there could be an emphasis that anything loss of productivity is majorly because of the health. If there is a problem of health, then there is a big loss, productivity which we are seeing. So there should be kind of a focus in terms of not only that we manufacture products which are generics, but products which should help in this kind of situations that we will be not at loss, that we predict the future and we see that what kind of changes we need to, but it's doable. It is not that something it is not doable, but it is doable. That's what exactly about a couple of years back we have done enough. Are we doing something different in Sun Farm? It's not only that we make a lot of generics, but we get, say, for example, maybe about 10% more in profit. But if you make something innovative medicines, which will be a best in class, with very high threshold, then your level of innovation can be maybe, it can be several X of the what is company today. It's not only company, it's also the national importance that we bring such products so that we can safeguard our country. I think, this is a kind of an initiative one should focus and realize where we need to focus our attention, how we need to achieve those requirements so that our economy and the growth will continue and people are healthy and we can have a kind of a life which can lead. Another important things is the environment, agriculture, and these are the other things as a part of the technology, because once we start that we want to innovate, we forget other aspects. What is the environmental load? What is the carbon footprint? What is the agriculture output? Where we are, these things also should be a part of the technology innovation and development. Would be kind of a focus one needs to look into. And I think this initiative should, probably evolve and we can come to some decisions based on the current scenario and future requirements, what we should be doing.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Rajamannar. I think if I may quickly sort of summarize it at a very high level, I think one you're suggesting, I think we need to be carefully assessing demand, in the sense forecasting demand and sort of catering to it. The other thing that you brought out also, so I think came up in one of the previous panel discussions, is that we seem to be, India is like already geared up for as a manufacturing hub for all in terms of in the pharmaceutical industry already. But like you pointed out, among some 70 odd candidates for COVID now, we don't seem to have enough there. As in, we are there, like the entire ecosystem here seems to be ready to manufacture them, but we are not there yet in terms of having candidates for like in such a situation of crisis. I guess that's the challenge, and you also nicely brought out that we seem to have all the right ingredients, so to say, in different pockets. I think hopefully in the realization of our STIP 2020, we should see how best to stitch them together so that we are able to overcome this sort of a shortcoming we have here, right? As in, I guess that was very insightful, sir. Thank you very much. With that, I will move on to Shrijeet Mishra. I guess he's been looking after innovation there, and I think this also sets the stage for you to see, like, as in, I guess, your insights onto sort of continuing this conversation, giving your initial remarks to sort of see how where do we stand in terms of moving from theory to practice and practice to theory, vice versa. In that context, Shrijeet Mishra.
Thank you, Sudhira, and thank you, Radhika, for the opportunity. I think, first of all, I would like to say that obviously in the recent times, we have done something right. The country has done something right, whether it's in the terms of startup landscape, the fourth largest startup location globally, Bangalore, Delhi NCR, catching up fast with London and US. Founders profile, if you look at 73% of founders are less than age of 36, 6% are women. Interesting. They're beginning to come in. 36% of the founders are sole engineers. Then if you look at India's growth drivers, whether it is the domestic market for consumption or the evolving ecosystem or the white spaces or the M&A activities, all have shown an upswing. And I think we have organizations that have global reach too, which is the fourth aspect. And I think Startup India has been a great initiative, which has just begun. And between 2014 and 2020 now, the last 5 years, there has been a huge increase. So we should recognize that. Having said that, there are challenges. I would talk about a few of them. The first, we talked about, I think, Janak talked about low R&D spends, 0.7% of GDP. Israel at 4.6, US at 2.8. You heard Korea at around 8%. Startup funding is invested in unicorns. So, what started in 14, 15, 16, people are investing there. There's a lot needed for the rest of the things to come in, for new things to start up. People are putting money there because returns are being focused at. So what do we do with upcoming startups, which are, ideas? How do you take them to reality? Angel tax did not do us some good. We know that. SMEs, we really need to look at what can we do with SMEs, to look at perhaps innovative funding models, corporate funding. Government has moved to CSR investment for R&D, but can we move it beyond incubators, for government incubators? We need to expand the scope of that CSR investment. From a people perspective, I think we need good mentors, need established entrepreneurs, corporate leaders of repute, and experts to come together. We need guidance on IP, when to file, what jurisdiction to take. Legal areas and IP is becoming a massive challenge for the future. From a government perspective, I think, how do you ease starting businesses even further? Removing multiple permissions, unclear IP requirements. How do you make sure that that becomes simpler? Tighter regulatory environment, labeling laws. I mean, let's take fashion. You don't know in the label if the guy says cotton or he says polyester, how much of cotton is there in that product? You wouldn't know. So stricter labeling laws. Look at need for evolving standards. I mean, do we need to take time over clearance of an innovation? It takes sometimes 9 months to 12 months for BIS to clear. For what? Why should it take that long? How do we ease that? Then look at ecosystems, academia. Commercial work in this country is research work, moving research to commercial is still looked down. We need to work with industry. Each academia should work with industry. Question you have to ask is, how many of you are will you be happy if your kid becomes a researcher? Where is the money in it? Where is the benefit for the person who's working at it? Is there a way of getting institutions, academia, and the person or the professor who's working on it to be clear about what he or she is going to get out of it? Second, in the ecosystem, look at private-public R&D labs. We've talked about it already. Why are the equipments under you? Every company is having its own lab. Why can't we have, and therefore it is underutilization. Why can't we have common labs where things are utilized much more? Incubators. We need specialized incubators. We cannot be limited to technology, pharma, biotech, e-commerce. We have to widen our scope too. There are many missed opportunities of overseas investments because of that. What we need is therefore comprehensive innovation ecosystem. There are themes from education and universities to government support to industry coming up together, technology sector expanding globally, VCs and access to global financial markets, innovation in the financial area and incentives, entrepreneurial spirit, attractive investment environment, and widening the scope will all help. I think the best example that I can give you is in two areas. I think first I would say Israel, we all know that. Europe, there are parts of Europe that are really doing some phenomenal work. Singapore, apart from, of course, the Valley and India. But in these three places, what do I see as enablers? There's a supportive government. Government is willing to fund, well, there are different projects. as long as the project is cleared by a set of people from industry and from the government, it gets support, financial support, and they don't take back money. If it becomes successful, they take back the principal. They don't take interest on it. If it goes down and doesn't work, it's okay. So the government supports this entrepreneurial spirit in the colleges, in the universities, in the schools, and of course with experienced entrepreneurs. There is corporate R&D, which is an enabler there, vibrant VCs, incubators, universities working with companies, and overall supporting an innovation culture. We talk about COVID as an issue. Of course it is, but that is our system one talking. The system two that Dr. Kanaman talks about is all about how do you look at opportunity in this. Digital is a massive opportunity. As long as you do not forget the consumer and customer at the heart of what you do, digital is a massive opportunity. We have got to bring what is called insights from data. We have to bring heart to the data, not data for the sake of data. Second, we have to co-create with people, whether it is companies from here or abroad, allow for co-creation, set up things for co-creation, university co-creation, set up for experimentation. A culture of failure is important. When you do 100 things, you'll maybe get 20 right, but you fail in 80. Do we have a culture of failure? Do we support a culture of failure? And I think the most important thing for me is to drive sustainable development in the future. The reason we have these problems is because the side effects of doing businesses, side effects of doing many things that we do, creates the side effects that may not be useful from a slightly more longer term perspective. We can't take away from our next generation. We are responsible for it. So at the end, I would say, creating an environment by focusing on inside out innovation and outside innovation and partnerships where 1 + 1 is 11 and not 2 is the way forward. Look forward to a vibrant discussion in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I guess that was really very thoughtful there. And but like you said, I articulated initially, right? There are multiple challenges, but also there is no silver bullet. In that sense, we don't have one magic wand to kind of wave it off and then clear it. But you also nicely summarize what are the things we should be doing in steps there. I'm sure, I guess as we move forward, these are things that we need to really look up, and something particularly like co-creation and is super critical now. And the system too, I think, is nice to look up things on a positive note, as in the sense, I think, like has been said earlier, as in every crisis is an opportunity in that sense. So I think it is time for us also to kind of revisit and then take it forward. Thank you very much, Shrijeet. And now I will move on to Professor Mahesh at the Madras, and he's the dean at also looking after corporate and alumni affairs there. It'll be nice to hear from him as to how IIT Madras is kind of looking forward to it. Or I'm sure I'm already aware of IIT Madras Research Park is there, and a lot of incubation support that has happened, and the kind of translational work that also happens there. Professor Mahesh, it will be nice to hear from you on your initial remarks in this.
Thank you, Sudhira. Thank you for the kind introduction. And I think IIT Madras is right at the forefront of several of the activities that the other panelists discussed. I'll just start by, you mentioned the research park. It's a real beehive of activity. For those that haven't had a chance to study it, please come by when COVID permits the situation. But look us up online. I think you can study the place just as well through the online portals. It's a place that brings industry and academia in close geographical proximity, and I think that's extremely important to enable conversations that would not happen between these players. So I want to just start by talking about that. And also, apart from the research park, IIT Madras is the most industry-facing institute in India today. We do upwards of about 250 crores of industry-sponsored work and another 350 crores of government-sponsored research at IIT Madras. And most of this work is extremely focused and targeted towards a specific deliverable for the industry. And this number, by the way, has been growing double digits for several years. And that again is a testament to the fact that industry keeps coming back. They like what they get from an academic institution like IIT Madras. I think the key element that got us to where we are, I want to frame 2 or 3 key elements that got us to where we are and discuss certain learnings that we can go back, that we can take from those. The first is that we have a group of faculty that have developed a culture of not frowning upon industry sponsored research. Shrijeet made this excellent point. We have a group of faculty, and across the board industry sponsored research is not frowned upon by their fellow peers. Okay, so you create an environment where it is actually encouraged. It's encouraged in many ways. It's encouraged through peer compliments, which is the fuel that drives all of us in a big way. But more importantly, our reward system is set up to where we are able to do significant consulting earnings from industry sponsored work. So essentially, you provide an upside to all of the players in the game, and that makes it sustainable going forward. The second aspect of what I think helped IIT Madras is a bit more historic. IIT Madras was started with German collaboration 60 years ago. And the Germans have a history of academia working with industry. And so they started the university, their professors were all here teaching, and right alongside in the early 60s, they set up an industrial consulting cell. And they said faculty here are going to do industry work. And there are countless examples. You can go on YouTube and look at the speech by our director, Professor Bhaskar Ramurthy, on the occasion of the Prime Minister's visit to our campus and the convocation last year. And you will see highlights of industry-driven research that have yielded fruit. And this list is the list that you will see there is not exhaustive. I want to add a couple more. We are closely working with GE, for example, on several of their new generation engines. We are working with the DRDO in many of the mission critical aspects of India's own defense development. And we are also working with the Election Commission of Government of India to create a blockchain-based remote voting system. So imagine a way to vote digitally from the confines of a polling booth, which may not be near your own locality. So these are all technologies that can be enabled if you think through all of the aspects of ground level reality. And I want to say that the issue of low spending by across the country is a good point brought up by Janak and discussed by Shrijeet as well. 0.7%. This number has been, we've talked about this number in many portals. I want to present one thought that I think this number is a bit flawed in the sense that we do not include defense R&D spending. All of the money that goes into DRDO is, I'm not the expert on this, but my own understanding that I've let to now come to is not included in this. And that's significant. We also don't include all of the money that we spend on scholarships for our PhD students. Okay, which is another. So I think, I've taught in the US and I've taught here in an academic system. I think our accounting is a bit different. So I think when we get down to comparing apples to apples, one needs to do their due diligence to make sure that we are truly comparing apples to apples. And my gut feeling, don't hold me to this, is it's probably better than 0.7%. I want to conclude by talking about 3 different schemes that the government has actually enabled and that I think are extremely progressive in thinking. The first is a program called Uchchitar Avishkar Yojana. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, UAY. This was launched about 4 years ago, where they said any private player can invest 1 rupee to fund a project, and the government would put in 3 rupees. And all of the IP then vests with either the private player or with the academic institution or both together as they would together negotiate bilaterally. This is extremely aggressive, if I may say, not even progressive. If you look at their counterparts like STTR or SBIR in the US funded by NSF, they're hardly, the government would give 20% for every 80%. That's typical. Whereas you're talking of a scheme where the government invests 75% of the project cost, where 25 comes from the private player. These are the kinds of schemes that the government has on their anvil. Imprint is another example, which is a little more balanced. They expect 50-50 investments from both the government as well as the private industry partner, and the IP is extremely focused in an area that is translatable into a product that the industry would take forward. The last thing I want to talk about that the government has done is to enable the option of using their CSR mandate and invest in research. This has been around for some time, but I think it's been highlighted in times of COVID that any investment in research can count as CSR, and that's significant. You look at the amount of money, that's 2% of all the net profits of almost all the big companies, of a large number of companies in India, and that amount of money, if it can be incentivized to go into research in a little more structured fashion, you'll see a lot more come out of it. I think I want to close by talking about one last point in this context, that academia needs to develop an appetite for industry funded research. I said we are the leaders in the country, and I'm still not happy with what I see on my campus. I think there's more that can be done. Similarly, I think industry also needs to have the patience to work with academia. No, I joked about this in another webinar. Industry talks quarters, we talk semesters. There's a little bit of a timescale mismatch. Let's bridge that timescale mismatch. I would expect every large industry partner out there to have a small team that talks and walks like an academic professor. I think that investment is worth it. It will allow the industry partner to gain confidence in the larger academic ecosystem, where they would then start to develop. They would start to invest in academic R&D translated to products, rather than looking at other ways of innovating. I'll stop here. Thank you, Sudhira, and we'll move on.
Right. Yeah. Thank you very much, Professor Mahesh. I think while I may be eating away the time, if I may try to summarize, but I like your comparison of quarters and semesters. I think I'll keep that phrase, and perhaps we'll attribute it to you whenever we are using it. That was wonderful. I will now request my colleague Radhika to take things forward from here. Radhika?
All right. Thank you all for your detailed insight into the theme of today's panel. Itself an introductory remark, we have covered a number of aspects, and the end that Professor Mahesh has given, a strong industry, academia, and public-private partnership that we have to come forward. These are the few of the questions that are pouring on us like anything, how industry and academia has to join together. So with this, I close the first part of our session, taking note from the valuable and thought-provoking insights from our panelists. Now we move to the next part of our session, that is questions from the audience. I will again repeat, audience can put their questions in comment box using hashtag #AskSTIP2020 industry. They can also put their questions and comments on other social media platforms using the same hashtag. Now I start with the first question that is coming. It is a very journal one, but very important one to answer. This is the role, what is the role of an industry in national innovation system in our country? How can large corporates, MSMEs, startups, they can contribute to the overall innovation ecosystem for the country? To start with it, I'll request Dr. Rohini to address this. Dr. Rohini, over to you.
So I think I realize the question is quite broad, and I think some of my earlier colleagues did bring up aspects that were addressing the question. But let me just point to a couple of things which might be worthwhile reiterating. I think if you know about another Department of Science and Technology mission called the National Mission for Inter-Cyber Physical Systems, that mission is the primary aspect of that mission is to set up innovation hubs in the country. in a way that can allow for, or rather, in fact, it's structured to drive partnership with the industry. And I know IIT Madras, for example, has one of those innovation hubs, and similarly, there are other places that are also establishing that. That's just one example, but I think the earlier point made in terms of the role is multifaceted, right? Clearly, if you go across the entire life cycle of innovation, whether it is R&D, which is obviously done in research labs as well as in the industry, there are some of the joint areas to participate, whether it is from student exchange programs. Then if you bring down some of the ideas which get incubated as startups, right? Now, startups, I'm speaking from Bangalore. Bangalore is a startup hub, and I do interact quite a bit with industry forums like the NASSCOM 10,000 startups programs. Now, those are intended exactly, and that's what their role is. Their role is to provide that ecosystem to both provide the ideation as well as mentorship from founders who have taken the businesses public, who have taken business to scale, to startup entrepreneurs. And I participate myself in many of those kind of forums. Then clearly, as the startups mature, whether it is in the software area or in other areas, you want to be able to engage with larger organizations in terms of going to market and scaling. And part of that work, of course, as an organization, we do in terms of taking startups to market. But I think the involvement from industry in the innovation ecosystem of the country is across the board, whether it is from collaborating with students in hackathons, to developers, to starting with startups and helping those ecosystems. So I'll stop with that broader comment because the question is rather broad, but hopefully my colleagues can address more.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Rohini. So moving, like you mentioned about these startups that are being bubbling in India so much, like they are contributing to the economy so much. So I want to take a comment from Dr. Rajamannar, being from a pharmaceutical industry, how a big pharmaceutical industry can take up small startups for shaping the innovation ecosystem in India. So there can be any connection between a big pharmaceutical industry and a small budding startups that are coming?
Sure. In pharma, when we talk about the pharmaceutical product, we talk about end product. But making end product requires, several other functions to work. One is that you need to have the raw materials, key starting materials, solvents, and manufacturing equipment, all those things. It is not that, pharma would be able to do everything from A to Z. It's important that one needs to realize that a pharma company, a big company, could specialize in one particular area that they can improve day after day in terms of improving the productivity, because the productivity improvement in terms of without losing batch is the most important criteria in pharma. If there is any failure, batch failure, then there would be 1 month production would stop. So it's very important that you educate your partners. Either it could be kind of a startup company, or it could be contract service, or whatever it is. The essential requirements, that the quality of a material, composition of a material. Because in the pharma, it's not only that you have a material which has all attributes, but there could be very small attributes. Solubility could matter. You have everything, but the solubility can impact your product, because there are several products that is the most determining factor for the drug efficacy. So you need to educate your partners in terms of what is the requirement, because when you go into the university, we think, the innovation means something doing novel, but in industry, translate that novel in terms of reproducibility. When I do 10 times, all the 10 I get 10 attributes with a statistical significance which can be of sigma 4 and 5. So because any failure would lead about 25% loss in the manufacturing sector. So if I don't get a proper raw material, proper quality of output, then it goes back at what is going wrong, because if there are 10 events in in the end, achieving an end product, all 10 events to be maintained in such a way that you would be able to get every product attribute at the end of the day. So looking at, we think, that we have performed something that's good in terms of learning process, but when we convert into a technology and technology into a scalable process in the manufacturing, one used to think that when we say that when we do a reaction, we don't mind using 10 volumes or 20 volumes. But when it comes to a manufacturing, 10 versus 20 volumes means productivity loss of 100%.
Right.
Then if you are heating to 50 degrees, instead of 100 liters heating, you have to heat 200 liters. There is a huge energy loss. So you don't know that when molecules, when it is not reacting together, then the rate of reaction could be different. And the rate of output could be very different. So we don't understand that when we are trying to develop such a process, that what needs to be done. It's very important that at a level when we are interacting to the small scale industries or the partners or the research groups or the collaborative efforts, that we need to synchronize in terms of what we want to achieve together. It is not that achievement of the end product by company, but it's an achievement is only possible that we work together as a one unit, and that unit should know that what is the attributes of end product from beginning to end. It could be the small intermediate going into the reaction chain, but at the end of the day, that small intermediate makes, because now we measure in terms of the process capability by number of carbons which we can introduce into the each step. If I make 10 carbons from 5 plus 5, whether all 5 plus 5 is entering into making 10 carbon. If I don't do that, then I am not designing a right synthetic route. So it needs to be emphasized that what we want to achieve. Can I make 2 plus 2, 4 with 90% reproducibility? If I plus 2 with only 20%, then I am not going to compete. Then one has to go on inventing what needs to be done, what needs to be done. So it's the significance is that what we are inventing, is it sustainable, or is going to compete with me next 5 years down the line, and we are going to exit of this business. So it's important to define what is the innovation, what is the unmet need, and where we want to achieve, and if I achieve this, whether someone is going to hit me back.
Right.
So, and you need to fence your IP by making more inventions that no one will come near to you. So these are the lessons we need to learn for a big company to survive, for India to survive, for small companies to add for the progress of the nation.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Rajamannar, for giving such a holistic view to these points, so that integration with the national priorities, with the needs, we need to come up together to solve those things. Definitely, we are going to address that in future also, while focusing on public and private partnerships together for national concerns. With this broad topic, now we'll shift to a slightly specific topic. So that is the how a government can play a major role in incentivizing the private sector to be at forefront of R&D in the country. Professor Mahesh gave us few of the examples, like magnificent schemes that are working where industry can pitch in national R&D. With this scheme, there are certain kind of tax incentives that are working in India. For that, Ministry has set up a Department of Scientific and Industrial Research that specifically accreditates the R&D that has been carried out by industry in India. So how well these incentivization mechanisms are placed in Indian context? So I know Janak has done an elaborative study on that. So I pose this question to Janak first to get a comprehensive view on the R&D incentivization landscape in India. Over to you, Janak.
Thank you, Radhika. So I think you're specifically referring to, the weighted deduction policy which was in place. So around 3 years ago, they reduced it from 200% to about 150% as weighted deduction. and today it's down to about 100%. So virtually it's done away with. When they introduced it at 200%, the weighted deduction was actually one of the most generous tax regimes in the world and incentives in the world. I think there was no systematic review of why this policy worked or didn't work. It was introduced and then it was just taken away. I think what we have to do is, and what showed up in our study is, we have to carefully evaluate whether smaller firms who are credit constrained actually avail of this and are able to maximize their R&D spending through an right. The larger firms are firms that possibly would spend in any case. I mean, they have to remain competitive. They will not compromise on their R&D spending. But many small firms who potentially could avail of this, maybe to structure this incentive in a way that you give them the 200% benefit and maybe 150 to the smaller firms, to the larger firms. One of the problems with the bureaucratic hurdles around this is that you had to have a separate R&D unit. There was a lot of paperwork that had to be filed every year, and I think these are things which small firms perhaps do not have the bandwidth to actually manage, right? So, in terms of investing in a separate R&D unit, or even filling up the different forms that are required. But if you evaluate the impact that it did have, you see that smaller firms that perhaps spent less than 10 crores in R&D actually benefited a lot more than any of the larger firms. Having that incentive definitely was a positive, but I think in this environment where it's NPAs in the banking system, although new schemes have been announced for MSMEs and access to credit, but a scheme like that perhaps should be promoted at least for the smaller companies to benefit from. The other kind of incentives that could be there, and some of what we've spoken about in the thematic group on innovation, is perhaps even procurement to some extent. So just to add to what Dr. Rajamannar was saying, if you look at the pharmaceutical industry, purely from a technology strategy standpoint, India has great potential to become the world's producer of medical devices. Today, we import about 80% of our medical devices. And here's a great opportunity, given the industrial base, given the strong pharma industry that we have, given the demand for healthcare that we have. There is a huge potential for India to develop that capability around medical devices. And here, as a starting point, if we have to kind of look at procurement, maybe the government could step in, given that this is a crisis which is here to stay for some time, and really promote many startups that could emerge as a result of working on medical devices. But having said that, often procurement rules, right? At least when you talk to startups who have worked in medical devices, often the procurement rules are based on certain parts and not functionality, right? So in a way, it inhibits innovation. So when you're looking at the kind of policies that the government needs to introduce, you need to evaluate whether it's working, not working. If procurement is too stringent for and hampers innovation, then you need to review that also. So all in all, let's say that the incentive mechanisms, when you introduce them, they need to be tracked, they need to be measured, they need to be tweaked if they're not working, understood, not introduced and then just taken away. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, Janak, for elaborating it so well. I know, like you mentioned, that there is no measuring how an impact of these incentives are actually happening to industry. We have not performed any kind of surveys. We do not have any kind of reports that should justify that these incentives should be placed or not. We have our industry representatives. They must have somewhere gone to the DSIR to get the recognition, national recognition for R&D. So we come up with the new scheme, that is patent box regime, that started in 2016. So I would like to have an input from our industry representatives here. So how do you endorse this patent box regime? Is it really working well, or there should be some incentives, especially targeting to the commercialization of research? I just like anyone from the industry.
Yeah. Maybe I
Yeah,
take this initially.
yeah, sure.
So when we talk of government industry, I touched briefly that we are good. We know that pharma, Indian pharma is a world pharmacy. But in terms of are we making drugs which are originated from India? Many companies shy away. The reason is if we say that even if we get say 100% of the DSR recognized labs, the drug discovery requires about 500 millions to 1 billion. And it is a time frame of 7 to 10 years. And success rate may be very insignificant. We think if there is a success, it is about 7 to 10 years, and the cost is about 500 millions to 1 billion. So it's the game is it's not reliable. You don't know that investment whether it will come after 10 years or not, whether that therapy is going to be valid or not. Also, we don't know. So in terms of that if someone wants to take a challenge and say that wow, that the incentive is too minimal. But there are certain things, we can improve. For example, if the environment is a significant aspect. If you want to bring new technologies, then one can improve the new technology because whatever is existing is old technology, which is outdated about 20 years. But if there is a new technologies in terms of the efficiency, in terms of the environment, in terms of the productivity, in terms of the export economic growth, in terms of the job, all those things, that would work perfectly. But in terms of changing the game, that we want to be a really innovative country, very different, whether it is a pharma, whether it's agriculture, whether it's electronics, whether it's telecommunications, I think which needs very different. In some other areas, it's predictable. In areas like pharma, it is very unpredictable. And if you say that the patent box on royalty, the problem is that I only can get a royalty when I get a product. And that percentage of success is very low. So I think it needs to be very different.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that patent box regime is like, finally the product is there, you have licensed the product, then only you're going to get the benefit, not for the whole process in which the technology and product was developed.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for the pointers out here. So definitely we are going to consider all these pointers in our next policy formulation process. So
if I may just add.
Yeah, sure.
It's not just about our current system is conducive to technology transfer, as Rajamannar has just said, rather than development of indigenous technology. I think that, even the laws, it is sometimes easier to get patent outside the country than in the country because there are easier rules. And if you're thinking global rather than just India, I think you need to look at not just rewarding or thinking through a system that goes through creation or IPs, but also for scale up and for exit. So if you look at Israel, it does for all three: for IPs, which is application, for scale up, and for exit, which is exactly what Rajamannar was talking about. That what is the contribution you bring back? In terms of top line, in terms of foreign exchange, in terms of employability, there are many more areas there. And I think you should find a way of not just looking at one aspect of it, which is developing an idea or technology transfer, but looking at it holistically. That's what I would say.
Yeah. Truly said, and we totally endorse on that fact that research is not simply coming up with a product, but we have to start right from the ideation to prototype development to product development and to integrate it with industry and then with the community. So with this, now I request Sudhira to ask a little different tangent of questions that will cover industrial R&D perspective. So over to you, Sudhira.
Yeah, thank you, Radhika. Before I kind of take up other things that we were looking at, we have some questions from our audience. One of them is by Dr. Asad Sahib. He posted this on YouTube. So he has this to ask to the panelists. I'll just read out his question. In the opinion of the panelists representing industry, what could academics do better in interacting with the community? As in, many academicians do not interact with CIA and in FICI forums. Another aspect is that Government of India has recently encouraged the use of CSR funding for scientific research. Why industry has not felt encouraged to utilize this option to foster research across the board? I would encourage or request any of you to kind of take lead on this and respond.
Yeah.
Shrijeet or
Yeah,
Rohini?
let me give it a shot.
All right.
I think I've had some very interesting experience with academia. And let me just start by saying that at any point of time, you should look at current and future needs. Your starting point for whether it is academia or it is business or it is corporate or it is government is to look at future trends, future needs, and current needs. That's a starting point. Once you get that, you'll realize that there are certain things that are common globally, and for the country, which is what Radhika, you also mentioned. They are large enough to be taken for the country as well as globally. Once you do that, you should actually then partner with academia. You should partner with universities, colleges, use college students, as we talked about, startups, VCs, government. I mean, look at Singapore government, how they actually progress things, right? And looking, of course, at partnerships with corporates. I mean, on this panel, I would love to work with anybody who 1+1 believes that there is a need on the other side that we could solve together. So, with Microsoft, we do quite a bit of work on that space. Now, I think the starting point for academia is to get to know what those evolved or what those needs are, right? Work with industry because coming up with an idea for the sake of an idea has no meaning. How do you take that idea if you know where it is starting from? The starting point. From that starting point, what is it that is required? And working on that, and as Mahesh put it, not just short term, but also having patience. Industry needs that. I completely agree. Equally, academia needs to understand what is required on the other side and work together to make it happen. And open to say, the other point I would say is, let's say you've got a need. You want to work on an idea. There is no harm in going outside in as much as inside out. Why do we want to create everything from scratch? Why do we think we know it all? Why can't we partner with the best in the world? I can tell you anything that I have thought of in the last 2.5, or should I say in the last 10, 15 years. Whenever I've gone out, I found 10,000 people ahead of me and well ahead of me in terms of things. Whether it's a corporate, whether it's a startup, whether it's a VC. Why don't we build out? So we have something called BizLabs, which we use quite extensively in our company. BizLabs NXT, by the way. We use it across the board to make sure that we are abreast of the best possible idea. Whether it's a research idea, we don't know about it or we know about it enough. We use it to get to know who are ahead of us and how can we collaborate. So I think 3 areas: get to know what the needs of the consumer and customers are. 2, willingness to collaborate and learn from anywhere from the outside world. And 3, working systematically on the deliverables in the short term, medium term, and long term, I think is the way to go forward. Over.
Thank you.
Radhika or Sudhira, can I add a viewpoint to what Shrijeet just mentioned?
I was about to prompt you, sir.
Okay, you go ahead. You prompt me and then. All right. So I think your prompt is sounding very good. So I want to hear your prompt as well.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. So I think, look, there is a huge disconnect between industry and academia. I think the first step is to develop a sense of confidence in the, so like what you would call in a dispute resolution process, confidence building measures. We are not in dispute, but something like that is necessary here. That we do need a simple, like a set of events or fora, platforms where we can just hold conversations. And I want to make a clear point here. conversations between IIT, IISc, faculty and industry happens quite a bit in the country. That's not enough. India is a country of 10,000 engineering colleges. India is but only 23 IITs, 30 NITs, and one IISc. So we're in extremely we are not in a level playing field at all. And I have actually written about this in in other fora, that we do need to enhance the conversations and the intensity of those conversations across the spectrum. There is value that every college faculty member brings, and we need to realize, we need to first start with a sense of confidence in the two parties. Okay, now the second point is, large companies already have the wherewithal and the know-how to exploit the academia in their immediate vicinity, or even if they're not in the immediate vicinity. The much larger MSME sector, and even the slightly larger companies that aren't, even the slightly larger companies that are, let's say, that started as a joint venture, have remained a joint venture. This goes to a point that Janak made earlier, where did the tax regime fail? In my opinion, we are at a point in our own learning curve where joint venture should be penalized. Let's not just talk of a carrot alone. We need a stick on the other side. So you've built, India has invested a ton of money to build the academic ecosystem, right? The industry, of course, has grown on its own, profitable platform. But we now need to have both a carrot and a stick approach to enable these conversations, very gently though. Now, the last point I want to make, with where do we see academia not, this partnership, and what do we need to do to enhance the conversation? I think there is a role for sabbaticals. Like at IIT, I get to take a sabbatical once a year, and institutionally, once every six years. I'm sorry. So institutionally, we've enabled that this period can be spent in an industry, and essentially do what is mutually agreeable. This scheme or this kind of a facility is not available to the academic community at large. And I think what it does is, the reason it has not been enabled is, I think, is based on a bit of a myopic view of sustainability and profitability on both sides. So I think if we can enable an opportunity for faculty members to become embedded in an industry for up to a month to a year, a minimum month to a year, you'll see wonders happen. I know that having industry people come teach is more difficult, because there are clear profit motives. While we would also like that to happen, I think movement of people from academia to industry is probably easier to enable, and that should be something you should look at in the science and technology policy.
Right. I guess Janak has something to say.
If I may add after Janak.
Thank you, Professor Mahesh. Janak,
Just,
go ahead.
I think when we talk about the role of industry internationally, I think it is the role of industry to actually demand certain things of academia as well, in terms of output. In industry today, those demands with our academic institutions. Mahesh is one of the few at an institution where people automatically turn to that relation. But the demands from, say, the larger players, like you were saying, they're able to exploit it. But when you have smaller firms that come with such problems, I think the academic involved in addressing those issues should also be about dealing with smaller firms, not about the big brands. I don't know if that is something which perhaps also curtails that ability for that partnership to flourish. The other aspect is, when we have these schemes, now UAY, Mahesh mentioned, I'm just wondering whether limited to a very few institutions and the elite institutions, whether it's the IITs or it's open to everybody, because
No, it was not open to everybody, Janak. It was only open to the IITs, and so was Imprint, only open to the IIT.
so that in a way again. And one other issue that I found, many small medium firms just are not even aware of the there. There has to be, trying, they're introducing schemes, they're trying to promote this, but we need to go out and market what are these schemes all about. Your Prime Minister's Fellowship, how do you avail of, numerous other schemes that people could benefit from, whether it's for training, whether it's for upgradation of machinery, and again, partnerships with universities. So I think the lack of awareness around schemes, maybe the quantum sometimes is distributed amongst too many schemes, and therefore it's not something which is attractive for industry. And I would say that academia, they have industry has to place the demands on academic output. And one of the reasons why this is very critical is because today, I mentioned very early on, 7% of research is performed through the higher education sector. In most countries where there are flourishing research ecosystems, it's happening through the universities. About 10 to 15% of national R&D happens through the academic institutions. What that leads to is also attracting the best researchers into the university system, because those who are academically inclined will want to get into institutions where funding is obviously being put. And the other aspect is that you have students who benefit from your researchers who are partnering with industry. So automatically the skills gap is something which also potentially could get addressed if India took the lead in partnering with academic institutions. From academic side, I'd say just be a little more open to ideas that smaller industry or smaller firms who are trying to be innovative, if they have a problem and they come to you, just be open to dealing with smaller firms also. Thank you.
I'd just like to add one point to the point that, can you hear me? To the point that that Mahesh was raising earlier. I think the interaction between academia and industry, the conversations are important, and it is important to have them more frequently in different forums. The need for, especially in areas like data and data science, machine learning, AI, artificial intelligence, etc. I think it's very important that that academia brings industry people to do some of the teaching and some of the because I think Mahesh was mentioning that it's harder, but I think there's both appetite as well as a need, because many of these areas are just not learned in an academic setting. You have to learn them in the context of the problem, in context of the real world. So that need from a fundamental perspective of that area itself is so much stronger for even beyond any other innovation exchange.
Right.
Yeah. Can I share on?
Just to add a bit on the piece as well. See, one of the things that I've noticed in many parts of the world is that there is an incentive for the academia to work on what is called applied research.
Yeah.
Now let me explain. And it is in some cases it is standardized, in some cases it is not.
Yeah.
In Israel, for example, there is a professor who has 5 companies on 5 different products. And there is, of course, an agreement between him and he has his own company.
Yeah.
And that is allowed. And he has a share between his own company and the institution that he represents. But there needs to be a standardization of incentives. Now, we don't know whether the professor comes up with an idea. I mean, if he gets peanuts out of it, why would he work? And then he also doesn't know how to take it to the market, how to give it scale. So there is experts from the industry that work along with that professor and bring it to the real market. So I think this work between incentivizing, standardizing that incentive for professors and academic institutions will be useful. 2, having mentors and benefits of bringing it together, whether it is in the digital space or it is in the manufacturing space or what have you. How companies can give scale? A big company can give you wind. Last point I would make is, these are small startups, whether it comes from academia or academia works along with startup, or a large company works with a startup. They are not your employees. You must know how to deal with startups. And I think that culture of developing how you deal with startups and with, I dare to say, even academia, is an important part that industry needs to learn. So I think it is all these three combinations: incentives, mentoring, so that industry can take it to the real world, and learning of an aspect of how a startup can be well initiated into from an academics or from any other field to the large company are the three things that I would add. Over.
Aditya, can I make a point?
Yeah, sure.
Sure. No, last 3 years, I'm a research council member to one of the CSR labs. When I see, in close quarters, there is an excellent knowledge. But how this knowledge is translated into which can work in terms of a product is something there is a mismatch, because most of the research institutes you work on in terms of publishing things, something filing a patent, but what is that innovation, where it would work, and how it would work, and how different it is compared to what existing, how do I differentiate? We forget to work on that principle, because a couple of years back there are Nobel Prize on the hypoxia inducing factor, and this became a drug from the university professors and then emerged as a drug. We have ideas in our research labs, but the idea making into a work where I have something, an important observation, how do I substantiate? Because there needs to be orthogonal understanding by different ways that my innovation, if I think it is going to work, it's working. But if I approach in a different manner, whether it will work, how do I translate this research into an animal model, to the human system, into a small scale, to a large scale, or the commercial scale? These kind of aspects, there is a mismatch. I think a mentoring from industry and industry learning what academia has, it's an important bridge we need to create, but there is nowhere from academia joins any of the conferences like CPHI, the Pharmaceutical conference, where they see that what industry needs, what they are looking at, and there is no open house forums from the universities. These are the technologies in different areas, and this is where we can contribute. This is where we are different. This is how we are different. This is what we have established, and this is what the change can bring. So that kind of an understanding, clarity is very much essential. And we could transform one of the product. We were looking into cardiovascular into something else in about 1 year, and then Sun Pharma could license that product, in-license that product to them. So that's something, there is something definitely an important innovations or knowledge available, but how do we bring that and understanding that that knowledge can create a value?
Right. Thank you, Dr. Rajamannar. Taking a lead from here, we are discussing about how an industry and academia, they can collaborate together and then they can deliver the product technology in a. So let me move a slight upper level to that. Can we incorporate government along with it? We can incorporate industry, academia, startups, industry consortiums. Can we form an integrated approach form of cluster? So PSA has been supporting the formation of a city clusters in which the specific MSMEs, specific large corporates, global MNC centers, according with academic institutes in that region, NRLs, all the national research institutes. Is that possible that we can support such a formation of industry consortium that can target the specific problem? Most of the industries, they can collaboratively work with academia and can lead to such things. So Professor Mahesh, you can give me a better idea how such connections can be addressed so that we take a loop of government, we take a loop of industrial association like CII, FICCI, NASCOM, and academia and national government institutes for research. Over to you, Professor Mahesh.
Sure. I think I had the chance to study the idea of clusters. I think it's something worth trying, certainly, because what I see is a complete lack of conversations between various entities that are out there. I'll give you I work very closely with our defense establishments on on areas that I can contribute. I know one public sector company and a DRDO lab. They share a compound wall and they work on the same problem, but they've never talked to each other in 5 years. So I find it appalling. You would never see this happen in the US, for example. I think these conversations need to happen very frequently. I'm talking primarily between entities that are very well funded, not even talking of private, medium scale and, medium scale meaning medium in scale operations. These are large operations and you need to have conversations at various levels, for these. I think the cluster idea essentially does that. It'll at least enable it. I know the vision is much bigger than just this. So I'm expecting that there will be benefits on various levels. Like, for example, Bangalore is a great place to have an aerospace cluster. In fact, the city, if you look at all of the industry there, it was designed to be an aerospace cluster, but it has not evolved into the aerospace cluster that it could have been. Similarly, Hyderabad has a very significant pharma base and a defense base. So I see that having these geographic clusters, Chennai is now evolved into an auto hub of sorts. So having these clusters that are focused on specific technology verticals would be a good idea. That you look at where the strength is in a particular area and then build around it. So imagine Stanford would have been nothing but for an HP that came out of Stanford, a long time ago, right? So HP came out of Stanford's backyard, and then Stanford became HP's backyard, and they grew together. So you need to either let this happen organically, or you you engineer certain aspects of it. There's nothing wrong in engineering certain aspects of it. You look at where, for example, our infrastructure industry, let's take the cement industry, is the strongest, and see if you can construct a CSIR, if you can institute a CSIR lab in the vicinity of that to take advantage of that large volume of industry presence in that specific technology vertical. I think I want to also touch upon this cluster idea specifically in the context of defense R&D. If you look at all of the countries that Janak mentioned earlier that do significant R&D expenditure, a large fraction of that is actually defense R&D. You look at the US defense R&D budget, that would be more than all of us spending on R&D put together. Now, the reason, if you look at where that money goes, only a tiny amount goes to quote unquote taxpayer paid establishments or public establishments. Companies like Lockheed Martin and Boeing and all of many other private players take in significant amounts of money to produce products that the army and that the defense can buy later. So this, in the US, at least I hear this term called the defense industry complex. And you hear every politician in every election cycle promise to break the defense industry complex. But I think that you have to understand the positive aspects of that. US is a significant defense power today in the world because of that defense industry complex. They produce technologies that have windfall in other sectors that may or may not have been intended. I think in India, I know we are now learning how to do this. We are slowly opening up the private sector for defense R&D. Not just through JVs, not just through partnerships, but through direct government investment in R&D with private players. In our own, CAG audit system, we have to figure out what would be the best way to make this happen. I think it's important to do this, to have a tripartite collaborative network of an industry partner, the government, and an academic institution come together specifically focused on strategic defense needs of the country. I see this as something that I think should be part of the cluster idea moving forward. I want to, if I may, Radhika, take a minute to talk about the incentive structure that Shrijeet pointed out. You know, the DSIR came up with a policy where faculty members can actually profit from their startup ideas, and some institutions have acted on that policy, more aggressively than others. At IIT Madras, for example, we said that any faculty member that wants to take their lab research into a startup and build a company will get an extra 1 year sabbatical to go to avail of. So they can just take off an year and become, a co-founder, start a company, and the expectation is that within a year they would kind of they would kind of move into an advisory role, into a directorship, but they would have already built an execution level that would run the company on a day-to-day basis and grow the company. And all the upside of that company is entirely theirs, barring a tiny bit that IIT takes in the form of incubation support. So we take between 2 to 4% of equity position in a company to essentially provide a whole bouquet of services on the tap. Everything from company secretary, legal, patenting support to space and infrastructure, a network for telephone, etc. So for all of this, IIT takes just 2 to 4%, and it's as you can see, it's a tiny bit. And just to put some numbers around that, we have about 150 plus companies in our portfolio. We've provided them about 16 crores of total equity support, total support in the form of either soft loans or in the form of grants. And the post money evaluation of only those companies that have raised money from outside VCs is at 3,000 crores. So our share of the equity is today valued at is upwards of 2,000 crores. So the upside that every institution has to encourage this kind of an investment in startup policy. So let go of your people for a little while and they'll come back to give you more. I think we need to kind of be a little more long-sighted, take advantage of the policy that the government has put in place, and each institution should evolve in this direction. Thank you.
Right. Dr. Mahesh, you mentioned about the IIT Madras. It's doing magnificently in attracting the industry towards it. I've read about a special credit scheme that IIT Madras incubator works on. That is a wonderful platform where industry knows, like, if they are pitching in, they are getting reward of that. So thanks for the wonderful insight to that. And like we have mentioned about the IITs, as Janak also mentioned, that these schemes are specifically limited for IITs. What about the other academic sector, universities? So I'm sure these clusters will help to boost them up. And I will take a special note from Dr. Rohini on that, because Microsoft is very actively engaged with university levels to hunt for the talent that they require for their corporation. So Dr. Rohini, a quick pointer on that from you.
Yeah, so actually, I mean, I was going to ask Mahesh that given, the amazing success track record, it seems to me something that one should be replicating, right? Replicating and really helping other institutes to draw from as a blueprint, so to speak. But to the question that you've raised, Radhika, I think the discussion, so our engagement from Microsoft perspective is not just for recruiting. I mean, if you look at, and I'll go a little bit across the board, right? We, of course, recruiting and going to campuses and bring the best talent and nurturing them is part of our role. But I think it's broader than that. So Microsoft Research, for example, is pretty much like an academic institution, and there are people there who are part-time faculties at IISc, I'm sure IIT Madras and many other places. They are literally an academic extension of academia, the Microsoft Research as such, right, which would be like similar to the Google Research and the earlier Bell Labs research where I spent my early part of my career. But it's across the board. I mean, I personally work on for example, setting up digital labs on campuses, and not just the IITs, but across the board, to help people be able to have hands-on tools and frameworks to code in frameworks used for AI and IoT and some other technologies that are forward-looking, and for which you cannot just learn from textbooks. There is work that we do on hackathons. Again, with academia to help both innovation as well as the whole collaboration aspect we've been discussing in this panel. There is, in fact, work that we are doing, for example, in quantum computing. So we are ourselves have established the course at IIT Ranchi, and are helping establish and build that course in an IIT, because it's an area that the country needs to invest in. We need to bring in people who are getting developed in that technology. It will require people to understand computing from the grounds up. It's fundamentally different. So we are working with an institution, like I mentioned, to establish a course there. So it's actually across the board. It is like I said, the developer side of it, it's the student side of it. So it's engagement at levels from K-12 to university to postgraduate level, much beyond just the hiring element of it, because we do see that our investment in the country in terms of skill development for forward-looking technologies is part of what our charter is as part of this country.
Thank you, Dr. Rohini. I think that was useful, and I think that also sort of leads to the next thing that I wanted to bring in, because we have another sort of question that has come on Twitter by Shrestha Mondal. She's a PhD student at NIAS, at the Institute of Science campus. One of the things she asked is how to engineer better spillover of the research capabilities on Indian soil today, in the sense, in that context. Adding on the same line, I would like to add a bit of respond to some bit of remarks that Professor Mahesh made also, and what you brought out, Dr. Rohini, is I think places like IISc also has come up, and like in the last decade or so, we have Society of Innovation and Development, SID, that has really brought in a lot of changes to that, and has allowed faculty to move on to set up, startups and move on. Patchwork is one example there, and also allowed a lot of other private players to come in and set up labs inside that. While that has happened, I think what really IISc also, in the sense, or I think many of the IITs also sort of contributed to setting up public sector R&D organizations like ISRO or CPRI or Power Grid Corporation and things like that. But now I see we need the need for us to kind of really look at translational, as in, I think one of the key things for us is to see how soon we can really look at translation. The other key challenge, I think, I would like many of you to, or each of you to kind of respond, is on the kind of capacity that we will need to kind of bridge this. In the sense, do we have the right capacity between both industry and academia, an ecosystem there?
At the risk of repeating, can I just say very briefly what my thoughts are on that? Yes. And I want the others to actually go forward. I think the capacity is clearly there. I get a chance to visit colleges across the south of India, for sure. I interact with dozens and dozens of colleges, faculty members from these colleges on a almost a weekly basis. And certainly there is capability. I think the bridges are missing. If we can enable these bridges, and those bridges can be formed in this day and age with online platforms, forming these bridges is even more easy than it used to be. And I hope that these bridges that we've now formed, thanks to these technology platforms, will continue to be harnessed going forward. I think we just need a phase of intense conversation. That's all. It's free. We just need a phase. I mean, let's say about 4 months. Okay, let's say everybody in an academic institution has to talk to 5 industry players. I'll give you a parallel and I'll stop here. We run a boot camp for our potential startup entrepreneurs. Okay, it's called Incubate. It starts with the letter N. It's a 3-week program. The middle week of that 3 week is really the boot camp. It's the hell week of the boot camp. They have to call 100 potential customers, present their idea, and get thrashed out of shape. That's the
Right.
core of that 1 week. I mean, you can imagine a cohort of 30 startup teams with three students in each team making 100 phone calls each. I mean, each team making 100 phone calls. You can imagine the communication and the conversation that happens during that week. You just say, this is our academia industry month. And you say, everybody will talk to 2 or 3 industry partners, take notes and share. Something as simple as that will probably, you'll see a lot come out on the other end of that this thing.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Professor Mahesh. Dr. Rajamannar, would you want to?
Yeah. One thing I want to bring, what Professor Mahesh said, we have talents, but when I look into pharma area, because it's an important, now to realize that from where we are today in terms of, becoming a technology improvement, Indian, this thing to, drug discovery partner. So you need a new knowledge, and I see that we have that new knowledge, IITs or CSR labs or ISAs or universities. But how do we integrate that? Can we define that when we take up the objective? What is the national interest? What is the unmet need? What is the challenge? And what would be the economic scenario? And what would be the time? And if come say that we have the computational skills, we have the cellular assay skills, we have the models in terms of doing small animals, but when we wanted to do something non-rodents, we don't have capabilities. When we say that we wanted to do an experiment in monkey, then it can be delay of 6 months. In industry, 6 months is a huge gap. You cannot wait for 6 months to get the data. So there's a big gap where it can be a big detrimental for the success of whatever the innovation which you are bringing. And the second thing is that how do we realize, make this changes with requirements, and when we wanted to do a correlation between the animal model versus the human disease, then you need knockout models, you need genetically modified things which are not available. There is a gap in that, and then you have to go out of the country. So these are some of the gaps, and which we need to fulfill as soon as possible. That we need to change today, and we see that we are struggling in terms of to contain the COVID, and we don't know which antiviral compound would work, whether it is working or not, nobody knows. We thought HUQ is the big boost for controlling, but it is nothing. And there are several things, antivirals, lopinavir and ritonavir, but currently you see that they are not at all having any effect. But if you wanted to really change the scenario, that you want to bring the India to be one of the country in terms of drug discovery, country in terms of value addition, country in terms of the uh, health of the India, then I think some of these things we have a knowledge in terms of how to identify a problem, how to choose a problem, but there is in between gaps. I think this is a very big requirement as a country, that for the progress of the in this, especially in the pharmaceutical.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Rajamannar. I think we are like about 5-6 minutes away to close this session. I think it has been very insightful. But I guess before we really, I would like to sort of wrap this up as we move to the end. I would request each of you to kind of, let's say, the powers that be has given you unlimited powers now. What is the top 2 things that you would want to see in terms of looking at industry in the role of industry in the STI ecosystem here? As in, I would request each of you to kind of give a brief overview on or your top of the things that you would want to see the STIP policy to kind of accommodate, or that should be really factoring in. Dr. Rohini?
Yeah, sure. I think some of this discussion that we have had is reflecting in my mind, and also as I was mentioning earlier, the ICPS work. I think the two themes which come together from perspective of what this policy needs to enable. One is for the tripartite collaboration between industry, academia, and and the government. And there are sectors where without that ecosystem working together, we would be working in silos forever. Healthcare, agriculture, some of those sectors are so critical that the government has to be the enabler of the ecosystem in terms of whether it's platforms or as we talked about consortium parks or whichever. So I think that is one element. The second element I would really hope in this policy comes out is that we are as a country investing our resources on what is called leapfrogging or pole vaulting, meaning that there are technologies that if we don't invest in today, we will be left behind by such a large margin that we will not be able to catch up. So rather than saying we will do everything that we'll build here only for the sake of it, I would rather the countries invest our precious resources into things that are going to become big in the future. And I put things like quantum, things like AI, and really pole vault to get there quickly and leverage the fact that we have this huge developer and multinational and all the things we talked about, leverage that human capital to do that pole vaulting. To me, those are two very big aspects of the policy that I hope comes out in this in the STIP 2020.
Great, great. Thank you so much, Dr. Rohini. Mr. Shrijeet, do you want to?
Yeah, I think what beyond what Rohini has said, I think I personally believe that there is a need for a comprehensive innovation ecosystem. Whether it is a tripartite between educational, academia, or government support, industry, those are absolutely obvious. But I think technology sector globally, we have to keep our eyes global, not just local. VCs and across the board and access to global financial. How do you give incentives to promote the entrepreneurial spirit for not just coming with an idea but scaling it up and also realizing benefits out of it? Obviously, to create an attractive investment environment. So it's a comprehensive innovation ecosystem that we need to create. That's the first point. Second is that we have certain themes that we are already working on, and I think Rohini also said that we should be abreast of what the needs of the consumer and customer are for the future. So whether it's digital technology, e-commerce, health tech, fintech, this is one area that we are already abreast of, and we must take cognizance. But I think we need to widen the scope to areas which has big impact on driving sustainable business for the future. Energy efficiency, smart grids, desalination, genome engineering technology, national supercomputing mission. I think areas of interdisciplinary cyber physical systems. So I think widen the scope beyond the existing themes. That's the second point. And the third point I would say is, reward the behavior of looking at not one-way innovation, not necessarily simultaneous innovation between academia and industry, but what I call interactive innovation. It can come from outside in as much as inside out, and reward the culture of developing an interactive system of creating future value, and also do talk about failures, and let's learn from each other's failures. But let's look at two countries that I know that do it very well: Indonesia and Vietnam. Right? These two countries, execution is given more focus than for coming up with an idea. And I think this whole thing of failing small but trying many things simultaneously is what should be rewarded. And in this ecosystem components of the innovation needs to come together, and we need to learn to have patience and learn something from the industry side, learn something from the government side, and also learn something from the academia side. And we should be open to it. Over.
Great. Thank you so much. Mr. Janak, over to you.
Thanks, Aditya. So, one of the things we didn't touch upon is and it's something that we're looking at in the thematic group of innovation, is that we really need a technology roadmap also.
Right.
Now you need to have experts to identify the technology priorities for the country and look at where we can push for greater technology deepening, which are sectors that we can dive into, right, and frame policies accordingly. Secondly, is that today we're discussing the STI policy, but it's very, very important that the economic policy of the country is also very strongly aligned with our STI policy. And by that, I mean, for example, the budget may have talked about having an electronic sector, right? But are we really ready right now? Yes, but the priority might actually be the medical devices sector. So can we focus the efforts on growing medical devices, electronic components needed for medical devices, and then spur the birth of a new electronics or whatever is required for technology growth in that sector, in the electronic sector in India. And lastly, I would say is that, if we really want to make industry at the core of our education system, and if we really want it to be the driver of a long-term economic growth and spending on R&D and innovation, where the government is an enabler, then we need consistent reviews in terms of innovation surveys. In Europe, you have the community, you have management and organizational practices survey in the US, for example, where you actually look at what is actually, when we talk about innovation, are firms engaged in product innovation? Are they engaged in process innovation? What size of firm should be engaged in product? What size should be engaged in process? And by process, I mean upgrading machinery or adopting manufacturing technology, which will enable their process improvements. So these are all to be understood what are firms actually engaged in, right? And benchmark firms so that they can learn from the best and learn from countries, firms outside also. So if you look at R&D intensity as a simple benchmark, yes, like Sunfarm spend what would be the global range of the R&D intensity benchmark, but you'll have many firms that don't, right? So we need to know what is best practices globally, what is best practices within India, and let firms learn from it. And lastly, I would say that as a country, we really need to invest. Now we're talking about R&D and innovation spending, but we need to build capability at uh, technology managers, both in industry as well as in government. In government, uh, bureaucracy also needs to be more open to innovative ideas, more open to engaging with startups in governance, for example. Just understanding the innovation ecosystem. For R&D managers, you really need to understand how best to work given resource constraints that may be there. How do you partner with universities? How do you file for patents? How do you commercialize technologies? How do you license them out? What are the options to you? How do you engage with startups, right? And this has to be a holistic approach, because you might end up advocating increased spending in R&D, but if the complementary factors of management of that is not there, it's very likely to not reach that level of output that you want. So I think these 3 points I would stress on are very, very important for innovation in industry to really, really contribute to our economy.
Right, thank you so much. As in, one of the things we wanted to also bring up was on benchmarking innovation, but I guess with the paucity of time, we couldn't really bring it up. But I guess we'll continue that separately, as in, we'll certainly would want to take it up. Dr. Rajamannar, your
Yeah. No, it's a very important aspect to identify what is an innovation means, because that can only help the economic growth as well as national health. But we are very good at incremental innovations. But if you look at disruptive innovations, we have a lot of fear, because where we fail, that fear is too much. And we need to encourage the disruptive innovation. Then only we move from the current platform to a next level. And that next level of moving, we need to identify knowledge. I mean, the industry academia collaboration is very much essential. So there is a knowledge, but we don't understand that where the knowledge is, who is that person, and how it can be helpful. And that open-mindedness, because we think it is my asset, the other person thinks it's my IP. I think, I mean, we need to work together to say that I have an innovation. How do we use this innovation or technology so that it can be used for the national interest or national importance? How do we identify? I think to that level. And if you say today that we talk of any of the medicine or drugs in terms of making a small molecules, but we don't talk of biotechnology, which could be environmentally benign. So we don't talk about environment, we don't talk about agriculture, we don't talk about many of the things. I mean, of course it is talked, but in terms when you say that, when you're looking at a technology, an aspect or a development or a disruptive measure, I mean, innovations, how do we link all these things? Because we think that we'll innovate after 20 years, we say that the fluorocarbons can create a ozone hole. Do we see a future? What is this innovation means? What is this economic profit means? What is the health of the country or health of the whole university? I mean, that level of an understanding that is very much possible. And there are people who are thinkers at various levels at various measures. And I think this STIP 2020 would be a kind of a thing where some of these elements can be really of help.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Rajamannar. Professor Mahesh.
Yes, I'll be very brief in this phase. I think all the good points have already come out. Capacity building, I just want to make one point. I think we have a large young workforce and an even younger student population. That's our strength going forward. I mean, if you look at no other country has this demographic dividend. What we need is systems that would train these people in areas that are of relevance going forward. And in my own mind, there are three specific verticals where I think India can and should be good at. One is defense, second is healthcare, and the third is transportation and logistics, or in a larger sense, right? Because people movement in a people and goods movement. And a fourth area which cuts across all these three is AI, ML, and data science, the whole field. So investing in training in these three areas should be incentivized. 2 days ago, IIT Madras launched a BSc program in data science for high school students, completely online, and it's gone viral. And I think there is clearly a need for a program like this among the young youth of the country. This is only going to, at least it's barely going to scratch the surface. The need is much larger. So we need a lot of universities and institutions to step in to fill this training gap. The last point that I want to make is one that I made earlier, that Shrijeet and others also, and Rohini as well, pointed out, which is to this tripartite ecosystem involving government, private industry, as well as academia. I want to, and Shrijeet made a good point on incentivizing investments in startups. Every large company, in that large multinational company, has a venture capital arm to them. I think in India we don't see that with the same intensity as we could. So maybe there is room for a provision in the STI policy that will incentivize and almost arm twist large companies into setting aside some bit of capital to invest in budding entrepreneurs and their ideas. I'll close with those thoughts. Thank you again for this great opportunity. It's been a fun couple of hours. Thank you. I learned a lot.
Thank you so much, Professor Mahesh. Uh, just kind of support what you said. I did receive a WhatsApp from your course on online degree program. As in, this is like 10 kilometers away from Bangalore. As in, so I guess things are moving on. And I guess one of the key messages is like government as an enabler, and the very process of this going through that is hopefully we have the government to is acting on the right direction to kind of enable all of this. I will now pass on, like request my colleague, Dr. Radhika to uh, take over. Over to you, Radhika.
With this, we come to the end of our session. Indeed, it was a wonderful and exciting session in which we have discussed various different aspects of industrial R&D and innovation. Not though completely, but I feel we have done a part of a justice to this topic. So a big thanks to everyone. I'm sure viewpoints from our experts and numerous flowing comments and inputs from a wider audience will be addressed in our next science, technology and innovation policy. With this, I formally thank you all for participating in this and making it a good interactive platform success for our audiences. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sujira. Thank you, Radhika.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank